Happy Wednesday and welcome to our NYRR Coaches Chat. I am Coach Gemma from New York Roadrunners, and with me is physical therapist from our partners at Hospital for Special Surgery. I said that right for one time. Cathy, Wysin. So welcome to everyone online. Welcome to everyone. So last weekend we had our NYRR Fred LeBeau half marathon in Central Park. I was out there. It was a really rainy day. It was more of a swim than a run. It was quite fun. Thank you to all of our volunteers that were out there that day. If you were out there, pop it in the chat. It was a great day to run. It was a hard day to volunteer and work. Let us know if you ran. Coming up, we have the NYRR Manhattan 10K, as well as the Gridiron 4 miler. As always, with all of our chats, leave your questions below and let us know where you are watching from. If you're in New York City, if you're in the tri-state area, if you are in Australia, Japan, let us know wherever you are watching from. All right, so we've got a little race happening in a few weeks.
Just a little race.
Little race, 13.1 miles. So, Cathy, how can our runners best prepare now for their 13.1 mile journey on March 17th?
So I think we're like 6 weeks-ish?
Around 7-ish, 6-ish weeks out.
So I think the biggest thing right now is to stick with your training plan. You're probably going to get some of your longest runs coming up over the next couple weeks. You're building your mileage. So I think the big thing is sticking with your training, not trying to do too much. So I think one of the mistakes that people make is they miss a run. They try to sneak in that extra run. They try to ramp up their mileage too quickly. They're like, oh, I didn't do my 8 miles last weekend, so I'm going to try to bump it up a little bit too quicker. And so I think the key here is sticking with your plan, not trying to ramp up miles too quickly so that you don't set yourself up for injury, mixing in some rest days. And the biggest piece of advice I could say is respect the taper period. Those last 2 weeks, really give yourself that time to recover and just not trying to push too hard and do more than what your plan is so that you can get to the start line healthy.
Getting there healthy is super important. We were chatting before, and you're running.
I am. It's my favorite race. I think I've run it almost every year since 2015. So it's one of I remember the old course.
The old course was wild.
The old course, like the loop of the park, which was kind of awful. I'm not going to lie. And then down the West Side Highway. So I love this course. I love this race. I love the weekend. So it's one of my favorite races, kind of just slightly below the full marathon.
I love that. I will also be running. I'm going to be pacing 2 hours. So if you are out there running 2 hours, you can pace with me.
I will be looking for you because that's what I plan on trying to run. So I will be with you or plan to be with you.
Amazing. I love that. All right. So you brought up a really good point. So what can runners do to stay healthy in the next few weeks of training for the NYC half?
So I think it does tie back into not doing too much. We have that 10% rule. So increasing your miles by about 10% each week, mixing in some cross training, some strength training. One of the big pitfalls here is runners just do too much. They ramp up too quickly. So it's really important to, mix in those rest days and recovery days, gradual increases, sticking with your training plan. And if you are feeling a little sore, a little uncomfortable, it's okay to take a day off, give yourself a little bit of extra rest. And I think, coaches have always said to me, it's better to be a little bit undertrained and get to the start line healthy than really trying to ramp up too quickly and not be able to get to the start line. So I think that's really important over these next couple weeks, and use some of your long runs as test runs for the big day. But I think it's really important to be mindful of your training and stick to your training and not try to add miles or ramp up the volume too quickly.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's better to go in slightly under than overbaked.
Agreed. Because you don't want to end up doing too much and then you can't race, or you have to do a lot of walking on race day. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you really want to be mindful of your training right now so that you can get to that start line healthy.
Yeah. say a runner does get an injury during training, what is that going to look like in terms of recovery? You know, we're around 7 weeks out. Maybe we can take a week or two, or, you know, take two examples of, you know, soreness that's not too serious, or if it's painful, what would you recommend for our runners?
Yeah, so I think you're naturally gonna be a little sore and fatigued, probably especially after some of those longer runs, or if you do some speed workout or hill workouts. I know I'm a little sore, and you really probably should, you know, rest a day after, you know, maybe not back-to-back hard days, or, you know, I don't like to do any kind of runs after a long run. So I think you're naturally gonna be a little sore here, but that soreness should typically improve after a day or two. You know, probably the next day you're sore, that kind of peak muscle soreness day 2, but you should find, you know, the third day after that, soreness kind of eases back. You know, if you're still sore and you have to take an extra day, that's okay. I think the distinction here is that if you're having a lot of pain and it's not getting better with rest, you're having trouble just walking and you're limping, you can't get out of a chair, you have to change how you're doing things, change how you're moving, how you're doing stairs, you're limping while you're running or walking, then it's probably something a little bit more, and you probably shouldn't be running, and you may need to have somebody take a look at you. I always say 5 days is kind of the cutoff point. If things are, you know, kind of better in 5 days, it's probably some soreness. If it's not, you know, you may need to have someone take a look at you, and you may need to, you know, ease back from training.
Nice. So soreness is okay, but if you're feeling pain, then...
Pain, yeah. And I think if you go out to run and, you know, you maybe thought it was soreness, and you find that you're altering how you're running, or you're having to cut your run short, or you're just in severe pain, then, you know, that's your cue that you really need to stop running and probably have somebody take a look at you just to be sure.
Yeah, because we're not wanting to change that gait when we're out there running.
No. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, if your gait's changing, there may be something else going on. I think the other big thing is, you know, if you're finding that you can't walk normally or do day-to-day things, running such a higher level activity. So if your day-to-day activities are affected, then, you know, running is probably not your best choice for you, and you may need to ease back.
Ease back, take it nice and easy, go and see someone. I love rest days.
Me too.
They are one of my favorite parts of training. So if you're needing that extra rest, take that extra rest now.
I was going to say I agree. I love rest days also.
All right, we are going to jump to the chat. Any questions that we have got, and any shout outs?
Okay, so we have a question from Frenchie saying, what exercises do you recommend to strengthen your knees, feet, and ankles?
I think that's for me.
I think that's definitely for you.
So I think one of the biggest things is probably some glute and hip strengthening. The glutes are so important for stability when you're running, and they also play a key role with, you know, managing knee discomfort, whether it's pain in the front of the knee, pain on the outside of the knee. I think of the knee as kind of like a garbage can joint. It may pick up on things that are going on above and below, but the glutes are so important for strength, power, balance, stability, everything. So, you know, things like bridges, clamshells, side-lying leg lifts, or Jane Fonda's, as I call them, are all really good exercises to get the glutes going. They also can help with, you know, any knee discomfort that you may be feeling. I think for feet and ankles, I would, you know, maybe do some single leg balance work. That's really, really beneficial, because if you think about it, running's actually a single leg activity. And if you're balancing on one leg, you're actually working all of the muscles up and down the leg, your core, everything. So, you know, the nice thing is that they're really, really easy things that you can do at home. Those are kind of my go-tos, tried and true, that I do.
I love that. I like the single leg balancing. I'm always like better at one side though.
Me too. But they're great stuff. You know, easy to do, and I think, you know, really helpful for runners.
Okay, so the next question is from Daniel saying, how do I treat heel pain that flares up during my training?
I think that question's also for
Come
you,
on, Gemma.
Daniel.
So heel pain can be a little tricky. It could be a combination of things, to be honest. It could be a little bit of related to the calf or the Achilles, maybe a little bit of Achilles tightness or Achilles tendonitis or inflammation. So a little bit tricky to pinpoint. It could be plantar fasciitis. It could actually be a number of things. So feet are tricky in general. I think, what I may suggest is, taking a look at how flexible your calves are, maybe a little bit of calf stretching, maybe a little bit of balance work as well. If you're having that pain, though, when you're running, that may also be kind of an indication to maybe have somebody take a look at you, because it could be a combination of things, and you don't want running to exacerbate or get things, make things worse. But I think, looking at the flexibility of your calves and calf stretching, balance work is going to be helpful. But again, I would kind of caution against things, because if you're having it while you're running, it may be worth someone taking a look at you. And I think if you're someone who's having this and going to run the half and you're ramping up your miles, if you're having some of this pain at lesser miles, it's probably only going to get worse if you continue to run.
I agree, and we're still 7 weeks out, so getting that checked now would be really good for your training and for you as well.
Agreed. It's okay if you miss even a week or two at this point. You've still got plenty of time. But I think, if you think about a course like New York City, the hills, the bridges, it's a lot of load on your body in general. But I just think if you've got anything right now that's kind of bothering you and it's not really getting better, exercises are great and all, but, I always say better be safe than sorry and have somebody look at it.
I agree. If in doubt, get it checked out.
I love it.
So this next question is pertaining to hill training. Both Robin and Renee are asking, what tips do you have for training for hills, like climbing the Manhattan Bridge or Central Park rolling hills?
I hate hills. Everybody I know will tell you that. And they're probably all laughing right now if they're watching this.
Hills are your friend. The NYC half is an extremely, it's a hilly course. So getting out on those hills is going to be really helpful and beneficial for race day. If you can plan your long runs and you can get onto the Manhattan Bridge, that's going to be really beneficial in your training. If you're close to Central Park or Prospect Park and you can just incorporate a loop of that or some of those hills in your training, that's going to be really helpful for March when we have the Manhattan Bridge, we have the rolling hills of Prospect Park. So making sure that you're incorporating that in your easy runs.
Agreed.
I love hills.
And the next question is from both Catherine and Anyeka. Do you have any tips for someone with shin splints?
Shin splints. Shin splints are another one that is tricky. I think sometimes anything below the knee, shin splints, feet, ankles, those things are tricky. Anything I think with the legs are tricky because it's so hard to really rest and just be off our feet even if we're not running. So shin splints kind of fall into what we think of overuse injuries with our runners. It could be a variety of things. A couple things I would probably take a look at. What's your training look like? Are you ramping up a little bit too quickly? Are you, overdoing it, not giving yourself rest days? Are you mixing in any cross training? I would probably take a look at your footwear too. Sometimes things like shin splints, those types of things can be the result of footwear that's a little bit worn out. I think the recommendation is you switch your shoes out, every 300 to 500 miles. So those are kind of quick and dirty things you can look at. And I would also take a look if you're doing any strengthening. Again, we go back to strengthening the hips, the glutes, the core, everything. So you've got really good core stability. I do think if you're having pain right now with running, it's probably best to ease off a little bit because shin splints are one of those things that are not going to get better if you continue to run. That's probably what I would say for shin splints. But that's a tricky one. I think you probably have to ease back a little bit, take a look at some of those more conservative things, probably some strengthening, and you may need to ease back a little bit.
Yeah. And then one more question. Sharon is asking, how can we prepare for the weather on race day?
March is March.
March is March. It's tough. I would say just have an idea about what you think you might wear on race day and, start practicing that. Practice with your long sleeves. Every year is different much. Whether like I've worn a tank, I've worn a long sleeve, I've worn leggings, I've worn layers. You don't really know until, you know, a few days out from the race what you can wear. So practicing what you have and know if it's going to work for you. If it's not going to work in your training, it's not going to work on race day. And as coaches, we preach nothing new on race day. So you want to have worn it, loved it, liked it in your training. So preparing for that is, you know, we've got a cold day today. I was wearing a long sleeve, I was wearing leggings. Last week I was in shorts and a tank. So train in, you know, what's appropriate for the weather, and then make that best call race week for what you are going to wear on race day. Also, everyone's going to be wearing different things because everyone feels the temperatures differently.
Yeah, I think in general, in the past, it's been everything from very cold to warm to moderate, sunny to clouds. I usually dress in layers, you know, wear something warm to the start because you are going to be chilly in Prospect Park, even if it is a warmer day in the 40s or 50s, which we have had. But I think things that you can easily take off, I usually come in a long sleeve, a t-shirt or tank top underneath with arm warmers, gloves, hat, you know, things that I can take off and tie around my waist. Maybe there's people along the course that you can hand things to, but you can kind of get a little bit of everything. So I've always gone in layers because for me, I sweat even when it's like 10 degrees out. So for me, I usually start to warm up. So I'm usually going to, you know, take things off down to my t-shirt anyway halfway through. That's just me. But I do agree. I think you have to be prepared for everything. And I think layers is probably the way to go.
Yeah, and if you're giving the clothes away on, you know, at the starting and the corrals, that's all going to charity. So it's going to a good place as well. All right, we are now on a really fun part of the show. It is the segment called Fact or Fiction. So I'm going to ask Cathy some questions, fact or fiction, and we're going to go from here. All right, fact or fiction, running will damage your knees.
We get this question all the time. So, fiction. There's really nothing out there in the research that says running will damage your knees. And I think the biggest thing people talk about was if I run and all the pounding, I'm going to get arthritis, I'm going to damage my knees. Not really anything out there to support. Now, you can go on the internet and always find things for both sides, but there's really nothing concrete that says running is going to damage your knees. You're going to, you know, break down cartilage, have arthritis, all of those things. But what can happen is if you have faulty mechanics, if you have poor running form, muscle imbalances, you're overtraining, and we talk a lot about overtraining and overuse. It may not damage your knees, but you may have knee pain. You could have some of that pain in the front of your knee, like patellofemoral pain syndrome or IT band pain on the outside of the knee. So, you know, running can cause some, I'll say, knee pain or knee soreness, but it's more tied into your training and mechanics more than anything.
Great answer. So fiction. Fact or fiction, everyone will get hurt from running at some point.
All right, so this is my favorite way to answer every question. It depends.
Fact or fiction?
I know. So I was actually looking into this online because I was curious, and I think I read that every year 50 to 65% of runners will get injured. So it's a wide range, but it depends on your training. I think for runners, we love to run. We don't want to do anything else. We don't want to cross train. We don't want to bike. We don't want to swim. We don't want to strength train. We don't want to rest. We just want to run. And that is essentially what sets us up for injury if we're not mixing things up and resting. So runners tend to get injured because they overdo it. They overtrain. They don't incorporate strength training. They ramp up too quickly. And we don't give ourselves time to rest. We don't taper. We do all of those things that we talk about wrong, or we don't do them. So, you know, we kind of set ourselves up for injuries. Obviously, it can happen. You know, you can be in the best of shape and done everything right. You've gone out, you trip, you fall, you do something. You know, so it happens with sport in general, but you're less likely to encounter some of those overuse injuries if you know, follow your training, don't ramp up too quickly, cross-train, strength training, and, you know, respect recovery and rest days.
I love that. Respecting recovery and rest days is super
My favorite
important.
things. They are my favorite things to do.
Imagine if there was a cycle that was just recovery.
Ugh, it'd be everything.
Fact or fiction, running can be done at any age.
That is a fact. Absolutely. So there's no right or wrong age to start running. Anybody can run. Pick up a pair of shoes. You know, it's time. It's commitment. Anybody can go out there. I just think be realistic with your expectations and your goals. You know, if you're somebody who's never run before, you know, you're new to running, you're not really sure, it may be a great idea to enlist a coach, you know, have some training so that you can train appropriately, ease inappropriately, because I think this ties into if you're a new runner, you're thinking about starting, you know, you want to make sure you do things correctly so you don't set yourself up for injuries. But anybody can pick up a pair of shoes and get out there and run. It's not, you know, you don't have to be a certain age or a certain anything.
I love that. New runners tend to have the super enthusiasm for it, so which is great. But again, we don't want to have overuse because that leads to injuries, as we've spoken about.
Absolutely.
Fact or fiction? Stretch before the run to prevent injury.
Fact. With a side note. Dynamic stretching instead of static stretching. So for people who may not know, dynamic stretching is things like, you know, high knees and butt kicks and side shuffles and skipping. So those are going to be a little bit better for you before, because they actually move your joints and your muscles through the range of motion. They warm you up and they prepare you for activity, lessen the chance of injury so you're not going into a run cold. You should do more static stretching, like, you know, hamstring stretches, calf stretching, you know, things like bending over and touching your knees, those types of things after to maintain that motion. So we always want to, you know, do some type of dynamic warm up or dynamic stretching before we work out so that we're prepared for our workout.
Great. What about post-workout? Static still, or?
I think, you know, I think you could go either way here. I like to do a little bit of a cool down at a slower pace. I'm not really great about doing anything after I run, so I'm not really setting a good example. I like to do a little foam rolling after a little maybe gentle stretching. I think, you know, that's probably what's best. You know, if you do some foam rolling, you work out some of those knots and, you know, little niggles that you have throughout there, and then some static stretching after. So I think that's fine, but I think before it should definitely be a dynamic stretch.
Fact or fiction? Runners only need strong legs.
Fiction. So, you know, we always think of legs. Legs are important. You know, we've already kind of talked about, you know, the glutes and everything and balance, but running is a full body workout. You need core strength and trunk strength for good balance and stability. You get rotation through your hips. You get reciprocal arm swings. So it's really good to work on your core, work on your chest, your mid-back, your arms, everything. You know, so working on full total body makes you just a more efficient and a better runner. So it's, you know, I think this is probably, you know, one of the other pitfalls. I know I'm not great with it, is really, you know, strengthening everywhere up and down the whole chain in the core, just to make you a more efficient runner and lessen those chances for injury.
And then our last fact or fiction: you need special shoes to run. Fact or fiction?
Fiction, with a side note. So there's no one right pair of shoes. Like, everybody's got to have this specific shoe. I think, you know, footwear is usually a hot topic. There's a lot of different things out there, as I'm sure you know, but it kind of depends, I think, on, you know, runners' preferences. I think there's, you know, a little bit of, you know, be mindfulness of what type of, you know, foot you have. So, you know, for people who have maybe a stiffer foot or more of like a higher arched foot, they may need a shoe with a little bit more cushioning. Somebody who is a little bit more of a pronated foot or is flat-footed, they need a shoe with a little bit more stability. And then you have people who are kind of a balance of both and a neutral foot, and they can wear a neutral shoe. So these are just kind of guidelines, but there are different shoes based on different foot type and people's preferences. I think when people talk about footwear, one of the biggest things I suggest is get into a running store, try on different shoes. You know, if they have a treadmill, get on the treadmill. Some places let you test the shoes out. I think that's really important, you know, getting an idea of what type of foot you have and trying to match to the footwear, but also testing different things out, different brands, seeing what works for you, taking them on some longer runs and assessing how you feel after, I think is, you know, the key with footwear.
I love that. There are so many different shoes out there today that you have so many options. So making sure you're finding something that is suitable for you and your foot, not just because it looks really fast and cool.
Absolutely.
All right. Any questions in the chat and any shout outs?
Okay, so we have a question from Christina asking, what's the best way to loosen up your muscles the days leading into race day?
So hopefully you've been working on this. You should start working now, I would say. Best things to be doing. We've already kind of talked about some dynamic stretching before your run. So high knees, butt kicks, skipping, walking, lunges, all of those things to help loosen up the joints, loosen up the muscles before you run. After running, I would start, you know, some foam rolling, you know, a little bit of post-race foam rolling followed by some stretching. You know, you think about foam rolling is really meant to break up any knots, you know, bounds of, I'll say knots in the tissue, and then stretching after that to maintain that motion that you've gotten from your dynamic warm-up and your workout. So I think, you know, that should be something that we should all really be doing now instead of just a couple days before race day.
And now we have a question from Lynn asking, I'm coming back from a second metatarsal stress fracture. What's the best way to build back my running?
Hopefully you've been cleared to run, is my first thing. Building back running, you know, it probably depends on how long you've been off, but you're not going to be able to just jump right back into what you may have been doing before the stress fracture. You may not be able to run as frequently for as long. So you're probably going to have to scale back, cutting back probably on the distance and the frequency of the running, as long as you're cleared by your doctor. You may also look at, you know, if you're here in the city, you know, more forgiving surfaces, like the reservoir or the path, as opposed to concrete or cement, since you've had a stress fracture. But I think the biggest thing is going to be not trying to jump right back into what you were doing. You're most likely going to have to cut frequency and distance back a bit to ease back. And so you don't set yourself up, you know, for another potential stress fracture or overuse injury by trying to do too much too quickly.
I agree with that. And being kind to yourself as well. Coming back from injury is really, really tough sometimes. So just give yourself a little bit of grace as well.
Agreed.
And our next question is from Catherine asking, do you have any tips for someone with plantar fasciitis?
Plantar fasciitis is probably one of the hardest injuries because we can never fully get off our feet. So I think I'll say, you know, feet and ankles are tricky. A couple things for plantar fasciitis, I would think some calf stretching. So sometimes, you know, the plantar fascia doesn't really have a lot of ability to stretch, but if our calves are really tight, that can put some extra strain on that top band of plantar fascia. So some calf stretching. I would also probably do, you know, some balance work, because balance is going to work all of the muscles in our leg, but also those really tiny muscles on the bottom of our feet. You know, maybe take a look at your footwear as well. I think anytime there's issues with feet and ankles and anything in general, I think footwear, it's a prime time to take a look at what you're wearing. Have you gotten new shoes in a while, and are you maybe in the right footwear as far as sizing or type of shoe?
And then we have someone from YouTube who has two questions. Their first question is, it's my first time running this race and my first half marathon. Should I go check out the course itself, especially the hills?
I think that's a really great question. Firstly, enjoy it. If this is your first half marathon, that is super exciting. I love that. And this is a fantastic one for your first half marathon. It is really fun. if you live in New York City and you can get out on the course, that can be a really great way to practice what you are going to have on race day. Obviously, it's going to look a little bit different because you're going to be running on the road. Please don't run on the road during your training for this. Keep it safe if you're running, on the course. But yeah, getting out and seeing that. You can run over the side of Manhattan Bridge. That's great. Great views over the city as well. Running through Prospect Park is great. If you are not in the city and you're wanting to replicate that as well, because that's a really good question, have a look online. You can see the elevation map, and you can kind of replicate that in a park, making sure you're incorporating those hills. But for our first time half marathoners out there, just enjoy it. It's a really great day. It's your first half marathon. That's super exciting. Enjoy the journey leading up to the half, and enjoy the half as well.
And the second question from the same person is, any nutrition, electrolyte, water tips for our longer runs?
So nothing new on race day.
I was about to say that.
You're going to say that. So a little bit out of my wheelhouse as far as what's best for nutrition, but a general rule of thumb is you should be taking in some type of nutrition. I think it's, every 40 to 45 minutes. So, that may vary based on how, what your pace is, but that's kind of a general guideline. I think what you probably should start doing is incorporating that into your long runs. Pick some nutrition that you like, whether they're gels, goos, there's a ton of different things out there. Everybody's going to have their own preference, but, start training with that now on your long runs. Use your long runs as a dress rehearsal. So every 45 minutes, I think of it as every 45 minutes I get a snack. That's what I think of. But get in the habit of taking in your preference from nutrition at those timed intervals. I like to take water or fluids like every other mile. That's my preference. But I think you should start incorporating that into your long runs, whether it's running with a water bottle, run with your nutrition. I have places where I know there's water because I don't like to run with everything. But you want to start to work on some of those things now and find what works out best for you so that on race day you're not tempted to reach for anything that's new.
Yeah, practice. If it doesn't work in your training, it's not going to suddenly work on race day. So make sure you're finding something that you enjoy, works for you. Check the back of the pack as well. Some of them have longer periods of time in between. Some can be 20, 30 minutes, and some can be 45 minutes to an hour. So really check the pack and make sure it works for you. But yeah, practicing that on your long runs is really going to be helpful and important for race day.
Yeah, and I think get used to carrying the things with you as well, because the one mistake you don't want to make is you don't want to have those things with you on race day, and then you're reaching for something that you're like, I don't really know what this is, and then you're not really sure how you're going to feel. So you've got plenty of time to kind of play around with some different things. I think if you have a running store nearby, like I know here in the city, I've gone into Jackrabbit many times, talked about different things, and then it's just, I've tested out so many different things and I've kind of got my tried and true, but use this time right now to test that out. You've kind of got a general idea when you may be taking things in, but you do want to make sure you're taking nutrition with you and hydrating. Even if it's cold out on race day, you still want to be taking fluids.
Yeah, and we have Science and Sport on the course. If you haven't tried it before, I wouldn't recommend that race day, but you can take it, put it in your pocket, and try it on your next long run for your next race.
And our next question is from Jeffrey asking, sometimes when I run, my body feels heavy and the run feels more difficult. Do you have any advice on how to help me feel a bit lighter on some of these runs?
I feel like this all the time.
I felt like that this morning, Jeffrey. I feel you.
I feel you so much. I think this weekend was, this body was not moving.
Neither was mine on Sunday at Fred Lebow.
Yeah, so I think, every run we're going to feel a little bit different. We never know how we're going to feel. We never know how we're going to feel on race day. I've kind of played around with running in the morning versus running at night, always thinking maybe I'm a little fresher if I go in the morning. I never want to get up early to do it, so I go at the end of the day, which, may not work for everybody. I think a couple things to kind of keep an eye on, what's your sleep look like? Sleep is really important. So if you're not getting good rest every night, that may have some carryover in, to just a running and exercise routine. Are you hydrating and fueling appropriately? I'm a big component if there's a day where it's just not going well, scrap the run or cut it a little short. That's me.
Yeah.
But I think, we're all going to have days that, that are like that. I think if you're here in the New York City area, it's been really hard to get out because of the weather. So it's a lot harder, at least I think personally, to train in the winter months as opposed to when it's a little bit warmer out. So I think a lot of us do feel fairly sluggish right now.
We haven't seen the sun in 2 weeks in New York City. I think adjusting your plan as well. Like if you're going out for a run and let's say you have a tempo run and you're just really not feeling it and you're feeling more like an easy run, that's fine. Switch it up. Talk to your coach. Just change that up. Or as you said, if you're just not feeling it at all, you're feeling really sluggish and your gait's changing, then maybe it's time to just have a rest day.
Or maybe even do some cross training. The weather hasn't agreed lately, so I just really haven't wanted to get out there. I've really been struggling. I've got to the end of the block. I'm like, it's just not happening today. So I've gone home. I've hopped on my bike instead and done something. So it's okay. I think we're all going to have those days. I think spring races are hard because of the time of year that we're training. So I think you do the best you can, but you're realistic with expectations. And sometimes, a day of rest or an extra day to kind of rejuvenate yourself really does make a world of difference.
You're not alone, Jeffrey.
Definitely not.
And we have one more question from Joseph saying, when should our last long run be before race day?
Yeah, that's a really great question. 2 to 3 weeks before before race day would be ideal. Working with a coach, having a look at what your plan has between now and then. Your mileage is going to be dialing up every week, and then we're looking at around a 2 to 3 week taper, 2 week taper, I'd say, for this race. All right. Well, thank you for joining us online. Thank you so much, Cathy.
Yes, thank you for having me, as always.
Love it. Good luck to everyone who's racing this weekend, in the following weeks, and who's racing the United Half in March. All the best.